各位观众大家好，我是胡婉玲，欢迎收看新闻观测站。那么很难得的机会呢，现在我们这地方呢不是一般的电视摄影棚，因为我们特地来到了台北，美国 AIT 台北办事处前处长司徒文先生的寓所，特别邀请专访他。那么司徒文先生呢，过去是奥巴马政府时代的台北办事处处长，同时呢，现在留在我们台湾是阳明大学的副校长。由于他过去在民主党政府时代呢工作过，所以呢由他来看看这美国大选之后所有的美国的国际关系呢，应该是非常适切，很值得参考的。Welcome, Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the interview. I'm delighted to talk to you.
You have decades of diplomatic experiences, and you are also a Taiwan-based scholar.
Yeah.
I would like to ask you first, Joe Biden has been elected as President of the United States. What are the factors behind his victory over Trump?
I think the most important factor is people got to know President Trump over the past 4 years. And I think clearly a majority of people decided they didn't like what they saw. I think one of the biggest factors was his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. He really sort of disregarded it and kept on saying that it would disappear. And meanwhile, people were dying. So I think that was a key factor. I was a little bit surprised at how poorly he did, that he didn't do better. Particularly, the Democrats managed to change certain states, which previously had been big supporters of him, like New Mexico or like Pennsylvania, Michigan, these states that he lost.
Okay. You have long and close relationship with the Democratic Party. And yes, you must have known Biden.
I didn't. I met Obama. I met many other American leaders. I met and shook their hands, at least President George W. Bush. I met President H.W. Bush, his father. I met who else? I met when she was Secretary of State. I met Bill Clinton's spouse.
Have you two interacted before with Biden?
No, I haven't. I interviewed, I interacted obviously with his government, with President Obama's government and with his staff. But, when at that time, I never actually got to meet him. So,
but Biden is a very famous political celebrity.
Yeah, he is. But if you're in the State Department, you're one of several thousand people. So it would depend to meet him. It would depend that there was a particular issue at a particular time or a particular visit that he would come, and then you would have the opportunity to meet him. I mean, I met Henry Kissinger. I briefed him. I met many famous political figures, but I can't say that I was, close to many of them. And you said I've been always a Democrat. Minjadong, but I've never been a part of the party, apparatus.
I understand.
But I've supported Democrats in general, partly because of my background. I grew up in a working class family, and my father never finished high school. I went to college on a scholarship. I went to graduate school on a government fellowship. So I've never had the view that I did it all on my own. I always think we need a society that's more generous to everyone and that helps people along the way. And in general, in the past, the policies that were advocated by the Democratic Party, I thought, were more often looking after ordinary American people. And so I supported that.
And since Biden's a celebrity for a long time, would you share us some story about Biden?
Well, one of the most recent moving stories was when he met with a young boy who stuttered. And he actually asked for his phone number to call him later on. He took him aside and talked about his own experience as a young boy stuttering. and how he'd gone to a Catholic school. And
but how did he conquer his stuttering?
Much like if you've ever seen the film about the English king who had a stutter, he practiced in front of a mirror, and he would apparently recite the poetry of William Butler Yeats, other poetry, and he learned by looking at the mirror that he should speak in short phrases, and that way the nervousness that plagues people who stutter would be overcome. So, for example, he would say, I'm here today to deliver an important message, and he would pause, and then he would go on. So he learned techniques that help people who stutter, which is really a function of nervousness. So I thought the fact that he would spend time with a young boy who had a stutter was very moving, and then invited him to one of his campaign events. So one of the things that defines Joe Biden is he's so empathetic toward other people. And I think it's because he's suffered a great deal in his life. He lost his wife and daughter in a car accident. He lost his son, who had served in the military, to cancer. He's had a lot of failures in his life, a lot of suffering, elections he lost, but just the loss of family members is very hard. I know when my mother died when I was still in college, how hard it was for me. So I think when that happens, I think it makes you more sympathetic to other people who have problems. So I think the chief defining difference between President-elect Biden and President Trump is President Trump doesn't seem to be all that interested in other people and what their problems are, whereas President-elect Biden is.
Here I would like to ask you again, media often say that President Trump is domineering and frank. And how do you describe President-elect Biden? I
think President Biden is much more careful in his use of language. I think he's more of a traditional politician. He's not willing always to say exactly what he thinks. He's more careful than that. The other day I noted he was asked to say something about the fact that President Trump had not yet recognized his election, and he said, let me think of a tactful way I can put this. So I think he considers his words very carefully before he speaks. That may be also a result of his early experience with stuttering as well. But I think he's more cautious, but he's also a more sympathetic figure, which I think people can identify with him better.
Okay. Let's move on to next question.
Okay.
And tell us about Biden's contributions in the Senate.
Well, he had a lot. I mean, some of them are debated, but in 2009, he was the sponsor of the, what was it called? It was the Reconstruction, and it was the act that was basically after the 2008 financial crisis. In 2009, there was a huge bill in order to get America moving economically again. He sponsored that, which was important. He also sponsored a major bill later on that was for, in support of women, to end sexual harassment of women. He, he was very supportive of Obamacare once he was president. So he's got a lot more successes. I mean, they're listed, there's lists online of the things he accomplished. But I think overall, he also was a great vice president. He supported, I moved on a little bit, but during a Senate, I think he could, there were several important pieces of legislation that he took a leading role in. And he was always very supportive of moving our alliances with other countries forward.
Okay. Tell us some details about Biden's contributions as America's vice president.
Okay. Well, of course, he did a lot of foreign policy work on behalf of the president. He traveled a lot. So that was one of his key portfolios. He also played a key role in Obamacare, ensuring that all Americans would have good health care. The very same legislation that Trump, for the last 4 years, President Trump has been trying to get rid of. So I think that was maybe one of the most important things he did, because Obamacare was essential for millions of Americans who don't have access to health care. It's not like Taiwan, where everybody gets great health care, you know, and has access to it. So that would be the thing that sticks out in my mind the most, is what he did on that. Also, though, his foreign policy role as sort of an envoy for President Obama.
Okay. Some people say that Biden visited China 8 times in the 8 years during his vice president, and some even label him as pro-China. How do you think about that?
I don't think he's pro-China. I find it hard to believe anyone, particularly in recent years, could be pro-China. You have to remember that someone like Kissinger, former Secretary of State, I think he's been to China more than 50 times. And there are many people who, when they resigned from government, they set up Kissinger Associates, Albright Associates, and what they did was bring American CEOs to China to meet with the Chinese leaders, thereby making money doing so. Biden, I'm sure every time he went in those 8 years, it was at the instruction of President Obama, who I think was always disappointed that he could not get more cooperation from China. But, you know, the world has shifted, and American attitudes now toward China are so different. So to say anyone is pro-China is really kind of, is misleading, I think. I think people ask, you know, in what way has China cooperated with the United States? And they're more aware than ever, and not so much. You're probably aware of the Pew survey that was done earlier this year in March, I think, before the COVID crisis was as bad as it became. And 73% of the American people who were polled had an unfavorable view of China. That was the highest it had ever been historically. So American public opinion has greatly shifted. So it'd be hard to find people who are pro-China.
So, will the U.S.-China trade war be resolved because of Biden's presidency?
No, I don't think so. I think that the trade problems are so deep and embedded, particularly in Chinese policy, that I think it would be very difficult. President Trump hasn't solved those issues either. What he did was he got phase 1 of a phase 2 deal, and that was simply in response to tariffs being imposed on Chinese goods. The Chinese promised that they would buy $200 billion worth of agricultural and other products, which they never did. And as a result, we've never gotten to phase 2. And phase 2 was the important part. I think most economists would say that your trade deficit is not an important issue. What's important is that the other country is not having a trade surplus with you because it's taking advantage of you. And China's theft of intellectual property, its industrial espionage, its support for state-owned enterprises, its dumping of steel in foreign countries at prices below the profit point. These hard issues, it looks like China never had any intention of getting to those issues and solving them. And so I think we need to start over and really try to focus on the hard issues rather than just on, you know, the U.S. has trade deficits with lots of countries, a lot of friendly countries, you know, whether it's Japan or South Korea, Taiwan, you know, so, but that's not the issue. The issue is whether the trade that we are having is being done on an equitable, a fair basis.
So the Biden administration will not consider China as a strategic competitor anymore.
Well, I think they will, as I indicated. First of all, American public opinion regards Taiwan as unfavorably. Second of all, if you look at the U.S. Congress, the Republicans and the Democrats disagree on almost all issues. But the one issue they all agree on is support for Taiwan, which is why we've had so many pieces of legislation that have passed over the last 4 years. They agree that we need to support Taiwan, and they agree that China is not a friendly country. It doesn't act in a friendly manner toward the United States. And beyond that, you have to consider the U.S. military attitude. Their job is to defend America, and almost across the board, going back to 2017, they've said China is a strategic competitor, whose intention is to dominate the United States and other democratic countries that wants to impose its system. And indeed, if you look at Xi Jinping's talks, the very first talk he gave after he became president, he talked about how he was a believer in Marxism and Leninism, and how one day they would defeat the capitalist world. So he's a true communist believer. So obviously, I think, to my mind, the U.S. military is extremely worried about China, which, because of the aggression in the South China Sea, because of their aggression toward India, because of their aggressive acts toward Japan, it's very worrisome. And I think, therefore, it's also as a result of China's oppression internally against the Uyghurs, against the Tibetans, against freedom of religion, against Hong Kong. It's changed perceptions radically in the United States. And no one since Xi Jinping came to power can delude themselves anymore about what Xi Jinping's agenda is. So I don't think any administration coming to power will regard the relationship with China as anything but difficult and troublesome.
欢迎再继续收看我们新闻观测站。今天我们的节目呢，来到了这前美国 AIT 台北办事处处长司徒文的寓所当中，能够跟他一片访谈。事实上，他现在旅居台湾啊，在台湾担任这个学者，事实上也在阳明大学担任副校长。那么今天呢，我们谈到美国大选之后的这个美国国际情势，但接下来我们还要继续访问有关于相关的问题啊。Some people mentioned about that, Kamala Harris is more supportive of China than Biden is. Why do they have such perception?
I don't know, because actually when you look at what she said, she has had very strong criticisms of the PRC with regard to human rights, both regard to the treatment of Uyghurs, which she said was unacceptable in Xinjiang, and also the treatment of Hong Kong. And she said action should be taken on those things. The one area where I suppose you could interpret it as being positive about China is because she represented California, and California trade with China dropped as a result of the tariffs. She said she wasn't in favor of those tariffs. But that's just one aspect of a broader policy issue. She has emphasized that she thinks the more important issues are the issues I mentioned earlier, which ensure we have a more equitable basis when we do any trade. So I don't really see any evidence that she's soft on China at all. I think that's wrong. You know, she's also very passionate about human rights. And you can't be soft on China if you care about human rights.
Okay, so should Taiwan be worried about Biden's approach to Taiwan?
I don't think so. You know, I wrote an article a long while back about how COVID-19 had changed global perceptions of Taiwan. the whole world now has recognized that Taiwan is probably the best of all the developed countries in the way it handled COVID-19, or the Wuhan virus, if you like, or as President Trump would say, the China virus. So that woke up a lot of people to what is, for people who study Asia, are already aware of, that Taiwan has made such enormous progress over the last 4 or 5 decades. You know, as I always say, it went from poverty to prosperity. It went from dictatorship, military dictatorship, to democracy. That's a very tough transition. So I think it's virtually impossible to be an American, to stand up for human rights, to stand up for democracy, to stand up for good health care and not admire Taiwan. So I think when President Biden takes office, President-elect Biden takes office, I think you'll find that he's much friendlier than a lot of people would have expected toward Taiwan, and I don't expect any major changes. There's already a lot of legislation. I think arms sales will continue. I think the U.S. military will want to do that, and I think he will agree to do that. The world has changed. It took the U.S. a long time to wake up. From the time when we first recognized China, or started to, in the 1972 Shanghai Communique. If you look at that, it's important you read what the Chinese said. In the 72 Communique, the Chinese statement included the statement, big countries should not bully smaller countries. And there's other language on the part of the Chinese themselves, which contradicts the way they actually behave. So I think people have become so aware of that. And they're aware of the failings of U.S. policy over the years. We all thought that we would be able to separate the two communist powers, the Soviet Union and China. That never happened. The Berlin Wall fell in '89, and in '91, Soviet Union fell apart. And they became, over time, they're the closest of military partners now. We thought that we would have common interests, we could solve common problems, but that never happened. Actually, they supported proliferation, whether in Pakistan, in North Korea, or in Iran. They traded and supported these countries. They never fully abide by UN sanctions against them. So we never had really common interests. And, we always knew we didn't have common values. But the thing is, with Taiwan, we share the same values fundamentally, and we share the same interests.
But based on your observation, will Biden administration continue to sell arms to Taiwan?
I think so.
You think so?
I think so, because the U.S. law requires that.
Some high-level weapons?
We've already done that. I think that'll have to continue, because as China has become militarily stronger, has developed longer range, more devastating missiles, has been increasing the size of its navy, it's absolutely essential that we continue to support Taiwan with increasingly sophisticated weapons as a countervailing force. And I think you see other countries doing the same thing. Australia, Japan, India are talking about building submarines, along with more submarines, more sophisticated ones, along with Taiwan. The recent sale from the United States included more sophisticated drones and longer range missiles. I think that will continue.
But I have to remind, back when Biden was a senator, and he used to oppose strengthening arms sales to Taiwan on ground that it would provoke China.
Yeah. That argument was used by different administrations for many years. I know what you're talking about, because when I was at AIT from 2009 to 12, the first 3 years when Biden was vice president, it was very difficult to get the arms sales that Taiwan wanted and needed. But nonetheless, even then, I think we had a total of about $11 billion in arms sales. But I was very, at that time, I know Taiwan had the more advanced F-16 fighter jet. And they wouldn't do that. I remember arguing with people at the National Security Council, with people at the State Department. You know, it was a constant struggle. You have to remember also, I think in my memory, President Ma Ying-jeou wasn't all that keen on buying U.S. weapons either. He went along with it because there was public pressure, but I know for a fact from people I talked to in the government that he had the view of the people within the Kuomintang that America doesn't sell us good weapons and they're too expensive. And so it was sort of from both sides there was a reluctance. And so it was frustrating for me. So I did what I could in other areas, the visa waiver program, higher level visits than we'd had. We got the Deputy Secretary of Energy to come. We got the head of the Agency for International Development. But I agree that they were worried because they still thought that if you towed the line with Taiwan, you could reap benefits with China. You could have a better, more constructive relationship. But in fact, I think many people early on knew. I think after President Obama's first visit to Beijing, I think in 2010, I guess it was a state visit, or 2009, he went to Beijing, and when he came back, people told me that he went with the idea that we could solve problems with China, find areas of mutual interest. And people came back and they said, well, I guess we're not going to solve any of those problems.
But China Air Force right now fly across the Strait, Taiwan Strait every day.
I know. And I think part of their strategy is to wear out the pilots, to wear out the equipment. So it becomes even more incumbent for the U.S. to find counter strategies to support the Taiwan military. And actually, the cooperation has always been much more than people recognize.
So should we be concerned about the security of Taiwan Strait during Biden's era?
Well, naturally, you should always be concerned about Taiwan's security because it's only 100 miles away, and China has, they've even passed, the Anti-Unification Act that they passed, that they said, well, if Taiwan does any of these things, they're a reason to attack. I mean, that in itself is an abrogation of the 3 communiques with the U.S., because the U.S. always specified that any settlement of disputes between Taiwan and China had to be done peacefully, and also had to be, and you can see the language, in the interests of the Taiwan people. So people should go back and read those communiques and read the 6 commitments that President Reagan made. We have to be concerned. We have to do more. We need more cooperation, certainly. But I think America is well aware of the threat to Taiwan and is concerned about preventing it. I mean, I know so many, particularly some of the strongest supporters of Taiwan who are on some of the Taiwan blogs that I belong to. They're so devoted to Taiwan and all that it stands for. And they feel very strongly, and have always felt very strongly about that. And that was true when I was at AIT too, our military people. So Taiwan naturally should be concerned. America should be concerned about its security, particularly in this transition period now. But, pragmatic steps need to always be taken to counter that. I myself, for example, I know this isn't very popular in Taiwan, but I've always thought that Taiwan should reintroduce the draft for young men and even women. And my analogy is Israel, which is faced by an existential threat around it. And everyone serves, everyone, begins to feel part of the answer to the threat that Taiwan faces. So, I still live here. I'm not moving. And so I realized that...
You have confidence?
I have confidence. Okay. I have confidence in Taiwan. I have confidence in the United States government. I have said in the past, you can't continue to be the United States if you look the other way if Taiwan comes under attack.
Okay.
And also, as I've often said, if that happened, what about Japan? What about Australia? What about the Philippines? Well, in a way, under Duterte, they've already gone in a different direction in times. South Korea. Taiwan is, for China, I think would only be the first step. So we have to be very careful in what we do.
欢迎再回到新闻观测站的节目现场，我是胡婉玲。那么我们今天独家专访是司徒文先生。那么司徒文先生呢，已经放下了 AIT 台北办事处处长的身份，实际上他现在是台湾的阳明大学的副校长啊。Okay, to wrap up our interview today, share about yourself. Okay, you are now Vice President of Yangming University. How do you like your academic work?
Well, I've always enjoyed it here in Taiwan. I've taught for the last 7 years, since 2000. Well, now it's longer. I retired in 2012. Now it's going to be 2021. It'll soon be 12 years next year. And I've taught at 3 different universities. Most recently now, the last year at Yangming. And I'm very excited by the fact that Yangming in the new year will merge with Jiao Tong University. I think it's a major step forward. I think that, the medical departments and medical research departments with Yangming will be able to join with Jiao Tong, their engineering, their business courses, and other courses, and Law Institute, and will be a much stronger university. I think we'll grow to about 17,000 students. So I think this has been the plan for a long time for the Ministry of Education. I think it's a good plan. I've already given 2 lectures at Jiao Tong. I give lectures at other universities too, of course, but I'm really looking forward to that because, for one thing, when I give talks, we can also televise them, so it's possible that, for example, students could be taking the course in Hsinchu even while I'm teaching at Yangming. So I've enjoyed it. There are very many brilliant people here in Taiwan. I think, the thing about Taiwan is it has virtually no natural resources. But Taiwan has achieved success because the intelligence of its people, their hard work, and their education and the devotion of parents to education for their children. And as a result of that, it's become a technological and medical leader in the world.
On behalf of Taiwanese, we thank you your compliments.
No, well, they're deserved. They're well earned. And, it's not only my opinion. If you look at surveys of expatriates living abroad, I think it's called Internations survey, every year, Taiwan is first, second. I think the lowest I've seen in recent years is 4th in the world of countries that expatriates want to live in. One of the reasons it's also one of the safest places in the world. So it's a great place to live.
Okay, you mentioned about Yangming University, Yangming 大学. Yangming University is a medical university. So what's your assessment of Taiwan's epidemic prevention work?
It's clearly been superb, the best in the world. Only 7 people have died. There's only 500 and some odd people who have come down with it. And almost all of them, I think all but 30 or 35, have been returning from overseas. So it's miraculous, really. And, for 2 weeks I taught via television, via Zoom or whatever, and I didn't like it because I liked the contact with the students. But by then, they had done, tested all over campus. They didn't find any evidence of the virus. And so, the president said I could go back to the classroom. So wearing a mask, and we did that. So I think it's been brilliant. And it's been, you know, everybody in the world has noticed that. You know, CNN and, I know, major magazines in the United States have called attention to it. So Taiwan should be proud of itself.
Okay. Thank you for your time. And by the way, 今天我们来到这里进行专访哦。你看我的镜头前面有咖啡，有水果，有 cheesecake。这个咖啡真的很好喝，真的是近年来在台北市没有喝过这么好喝的咖啡，就在司徒文的家里。
谢谢。
希望我没有出卖你。
我欢迎你将来你未来。
OK，
我们喝咖啡。
好的，谢谢各位观众朋友的收看，我们下周同一时间再会了。